She stayed to talk with an elderly customer every night, but one night he didn't come back. She noticed him the way you notice a flickering light in a quiet room, subtle, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. Every night at 9:05 p.m. sharp, the old man with the wrinkled fedora and weathered hands shuffled into the diner, ordered the same cup of black coffee, and sat at the same booth by the window. And every night, she stayed after her shift just to talk with him. Her name was Jenna, a college dropout with dreams that felt smaller than the town she tried to escape. The diner, Rosie's place, had chipped linoleum floors and smelled perpetually like burnt toast and old memories. She didn't mind it much. It paid enough, and she liked the quiet rhythm of late nights. But she hadn't expected the old man to become a part of that rhythm. "Evening, sweetheart," he would greet her, his voice a mix of gravel and honey. "Evening, Mr. Allen," she'd reply with a small smile, pouring his coffee before he even asked. He never stayed more than an hour. He never ordered food. And he never talked much about himself. But he always listened. Jenna told him about her day, her frustrations, her family, and her regrets. He listened like she mattered. One night, she told him about her ma, how cancer had turned the strongest woman she knew into a ghost. He didn't say a word, just reached out with a trembling hand and placed it gently over hers. No one had ever comforted her like that. It was the first night she cried in front of him. "You remind me of my daughter," he said quietly, almost like a confession. "She died when she was 21. Car accident. I wasn't there." After that, something changed. Jenna stayed longer. Their talks grew deeper, more human. She learned his name was Arthur Allen, retired mechanic, widower, Korean War vet. He lived alone in a crumbling house on Ashford Lane, surrounded by stacks of National Geographics and photos he never talked about. She started bringing him slices of pie on the house. He started bringing her old books he thought she'd like. It was a strange friendship, one rooted in grief, silence, and small kindnesses, but it mattered to both of them. Then came the Tuesday night he didn't show. It was 9:06, then 9:10, then 9:23. Jenna kept glancing at the door, pretending to wipe down clean counters. She kept pouring his coffee, thinking maybe he was late. But at 10 o'clock, the booth by the window was still empty, and his coffee had gone cold. She felt something settle in her chest, a tightness, a fear, an absence. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he was tired. Maybe. She closed the diner that night with a lump in her throat. She didn't sleep. The next day, she asked her manager for a late shift again. She waited at the booth. No sign of him. No Arthur. By Thursday, she couldn't take it anymore. She asked around, called local hospitals, even went by his address. The house looked abandoned. Overgrown lawn. Mail piled up at the door. A flickering porch light. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder. Still nothing. "Mr. Allen," she called, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. When the police finally arrived for a welfare check, Jenna stayed. She waited on the porch, heart pounding, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "He passed away," the officer said gently when he returned. "We found him in his chair. Looked peaceful." Jenna didn't speak. She nodded, blinked, and tried to breathe past the ache in her throat. The house smelled like dust and old dreams. There were pictures of a young girl everywhere, blonde, laughing, wild-eyed. In one photo, she looked just like Jenna. The officer handed her a letter. It had your name on it. She took it with shaking hands. "Jenna, thank you for giving an old man something to look forward to. Your kindness reminded me that even in the quiet corners of life, we can find meaning again. I never thought I'd care about anything after losing my girl. Then you showed up. You gave me back the sound of laughter, the gift of being heard. I'm sorry I didn't get to say goodbye, but I want you to know you mattered. More than you'll ever know. With love. Arthur." She cried on his porch until the stars came out. And from that night on, she always left a fresh cup of coffee at his booth, just in case. Jenna didn't go to work the next day. She called Rosie herself, voice hoarse and quiet, and told her the truth. "He died, Rosie. Arthur, the old man I always sat with. He's gone." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Rosie simply said, "Take your time, honey. Grief's not something you rush through." So she did. She stayed in bed most of the day, staring at the letter, reading it until the ink felt familiar beneath her fingertips. Her small apartment, once filled with cluttered warmth, now felt like a vacuum. Everything tasted bland. Everything moved too slow. Grief had a strange texture. It wasn't just pine, it was the absence of noise. a kind of quiet that crept in behind her, uninvited and constant. But Jenna wasn't the type to let silence win. On Sunday night, she returned to Rosie's place. The same uniform, the same coffee pot, same creaky stools and sticky menus. But something was different. Booth 5 sat empty. The cup she had placed there before her last shift had been cleared away. She placed a new one, fresh, steaming, black as always. And when her shift ended, she slid into the other side of the booth and whispered, "Hey, Mr. Allen. I'm back." The other waitresses gave her space. The cooks stopped asking questions. Even the grumpy night regulars learned to leave booth 5 alone. That became her ritual. Every shift, Jenna would pour him a coffee. Some nights she'd talk. Some nights she'd sit in silence. But she never let that booth stay empty in spirit. Weeks passed. Leaves began to fall. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the diner addressed to Miss Jenna Clark. No return address. The envelope was weathered and soft at the corners. Inside was a photograph. It was Arthur, standing in front of an old garage, his arm around a young woman, his daughter, no doubt. On the back, written in shaky ink, "She looked just like you." There was also a deed. Folded, notarized. Arthur had left her the house on Ashford Lane. She stared at it for a long time. Jenna had grown up moving from place to place, rental apartments, motels, temporary homes with relatives. No place had ever truly felt hers. Even her childhood bedroom had been painted over and rented out the year after her mom passed. She'd spent most of her adult life with her belongings packed tight in boxes that never fully unpacked. And now Arthur had given her a home. She went there the next morning, keys trembling in her hand. The house smelled like mulled leather, dust, faint cologne. The curtains still held a trace of yellow morning light. And the walls were lined with photographs, Arthur's life in black and white, in faded color, and glimpses of laughter. There was a workshop in the garage, untouched. Shelves of tools. A rusting motorcycle with a note taped to the seat. "Need someone brave to fix it. I figured you might be that someone." Jenna laughed. She hadn't laughed in weeks. Not since the Tuesday he didn't show. She rolled up her sleeves. Fixing that bike wasn't easy. She had to teach herself from scratch YouTube videos, dusty repair manuals, some generous advice from the old man who ran the parts store downtown. But she kept at it. Each bolt she turned, each spark plug she cleaned, felt like a piece of him coming back to life. And she started to change, too. At first, she still worked nights at Rosie's. She still poured that extra cup of coffee. But she began writing more. Sketching. Fixing things around the house. Eventually, she asked Rosie if she could cut back to part-time. "I've got something I'm building," she told her. Rosie smiled like she already knew. By spring, Jenna had transformed Arthur's garage into a small repair shop. Ashford Repairs. A tribute to him. To second chances. To quiet kindness. She took on small jobs, lawnmowers, broken toasters, old radios. People started coming not just for repairs, but for conversation. For coffee. For warmth. She hung Arthur's photograph above the workbench. He watched over everything. One evening, a girl around 18 wandered into the shop, backpack slung over one shoulder. Her voice was nervous. "My dad's old typewriter stopped working. I don't know why I even care. He left when I was a kid, but it was his." Jenna didn't ask questions. She just smiled gently and said, "We'll get it working. Want to stay while I take a look?" The girl nodded. Saturday. Talked. Waited. Just like Jenna used to. And suddenly, the cycle made sense. Arthur hadn't just left her a house. He'd left her a purpose. The repair shop became more than a business, it became a haven. People came with broken things, but often, what they really wanted fixed wasn't mechanical. Jenna had a way of listening the way Arthur once did, without rushing, without judgment, with stillness that invited the truth to surface. She wasn't trying to be anyone's counselor. She just knew what it felt like to carry something too heavy, too long. One rainy Thursday afternoon, a man in his 70s wandered into the shop. His hands were gnarled from arthritis, his eyes weary but gentle. He placed an old camera on the counter. "My wife used this one," he said, voice thick. "Hasn't worked since she passed. I kept it on the shelf for years. Couldn't throw it away. Couldn't look at it either." Jenna nodded slowly. "Would you like to wait while I open it up?" The man hesitated, then sank into the worn chair near the window. "Don't mind if I do." As she opened the camera, cleaned its inner workings, and replaced its ancient battery, he told her their story. 62 years of marriage. A trip to Rome in 1973. The way she used to wake up humming. By the time Jenna returned the camera clean, Working, Polish's eyes were red. "You look a little like her," he whispered. Different smile, but the same way of listening. He left a 20 on the counter, though she never charged for that kind of work. That night, Jenna found herself staring at Arthur's photo again. Not with sadness this time, but with wonder. His ripple was still spreading. Word began to travel through the town. People called her shop the Quiet Garage. They came not just from Ashford Lane, but from neighboring townsfolks who'd heard about a girl fixing not just radios and clocks, but something else, too. Something harder to name. Jenna never saw herself as someone special. She just remembered what it felt like to be seen when she thought she was invisible. One afternoon, a college student named Paul showed up with an old cassette player. He looked out of place in her shop, hoodie too clean, fingers twitchy from caffeine, earbuds still dangling from his neck. "Got this from my grandpa. Used to play it when I was a kid. Thought it'd be cool to restore it. Nostalgia, or whatever." She raised an eyebrow. "Or whatever?" He grinned sheepishly. "Okay, maybe I just miss him." It took her a few hours to clean the motor and replace a frayed belt. While she worked, Paul wandered the garage, pausing in front of Arthur's photo. "That your dad?" he asked. "No, but he was something close." Paul nodded slowly. "He must have meant a lot." "He did," she said quietly. "He still does." When the cassette player whirred back to life, Paul slid in an old tape labeled Beach Trip 96. The crackling sound of waves and laughter filled the shop. Paul blinked fast, then smiled wide. God, I forgot what his laugh sounded like. Jenna turned away to give him a moment. But inside, she felt that familiar swell in her chest again, the one that had started when Arthur first handed her that letter. She was still talking to him, still answering. One evening in early summer, as the heat baked the sidewalks and cicadas droned like static, Jenna returned to the diner. It had been nearly 3 months since she left Booth 5 untouched. The coffee cup was still there, leaned nightly, always placed back by the morning crew like clockwork. Rosie had made it a quiet tradition. Jenna sat down, her hands around a fresh cup. "I fixed the bike," she said softly, staring at the Booth across from her like he might still walk in. "I rode it last week, just around the block. Thought I'd be scared, but I wasn't." The doorbell jingled. A family came in. The cook shouted something from the back. Jenna just smiled faintly. "I still talk to you. I think you know that. But tonight felt like the kind of night where I needed to sit here and say it out loud." She paused. "I miss you." For the first time in a long while, it didn't hurt to say. Later that week, Jenna received a call from the town's community center. An elderly woman named Mrs. Hawthorne had passed away and left behind dozens of boxes, photographs, old letters, faded dresses. No living relatives. The center needed help sorting through her things, deciding what could be donated, what should be preserved. She was quiet. "Lived alone," the director said. "We thought maybe you'd care." Jenna hesitated for only a moment. Then she said yes. She spent 3 full days going through the woman's belongings. Most of it was from the 1950s and 60s, brittle paper, delicate lace, sepia-toned memories. But on the final day, in a dusty shoebox tucked behind a dresser drawer, Jenna found something unusual: letters. Not from Mrs. Hawthorne, but to her. Dozens of them, dated across decades. Some romantic, some angry, some unfinished. All from the same man, Henry. The last one read, "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I wanted to be brave enough to come back. But now I'm just trying to die with fewer regrets than I had yesterday. I kept your photograph all these years. Still folded in my wallet. Still you," laughing. Jenna held the paper carefully, heart heavy. Another story of love lost, of things unsaid, left behind in the shadows of age. She didn't know who Henry was, but she knew how important it was that someone heard him. So she took those letters, scanned them, archived them, and wrote a small article for the local paper titled, "A Forgotten Love in Ink." People read it, cried, called the center to share their own stories. A high school English teacher even asked if Jenna could come speak to her students. "You fix things," she said. "But more than that, you remember them. You listen." Jenna stood in front of that class weeks later, hands a little shaky, unsure of what to say. But then she began talking about Arthur, about the coffee cup, about grief and stillness and second chances. No one made a sound. No one looked away. One evening, long after the garage had closed and the sky turned indigo, Jenna found herself riding Arthur's motorcycle out to the edge of town. The road curved gently along the lake, where fireflies danced like tiny lanterns and the trees whispered softly in the warm wind. She parked, sat on the grass, and watched the stars appear. "This is where I go when I need to breathe," she whispered aloud. She wasn't talking to anyone, and yet she was. "I keep thinking about how I didn't know how much you were giving me, Arthur. You didn't just listen. You gave me roots. You showed me that stillness isn't the same as emptiness." She leaned back on her elbows. "I think I finally figured out what I want to do with the house." The decision had been growing in her quietly, like a plant reaching for sun. "I want to open a space there. For people like us. A place where the forgotten don't stay forgotten. A place for stories. For mending what can be mended. For remembering what matters." She closed her eyes and pictured it. A kitchen that smelled like cinnamon. A bookshelf filled with secondhand novels. A listening room with old records. A bench beneath a tree. Volunteers who sat with the elderly just to hear them talk. She would call it the listening house. And it would begin where his story left off. The next few months became a quiet storm of movement, planning, and growth. Jenna officially filed for a nonprofit license under the name The Listening House. She enlisted the help of a local lawyer who'd once brought her an antique wall clock to fix. When he asked why she was doing this, she answered simply, "Because no one should feel like they don't matter at the end of their life." Word traveled fast. By the time summer gave way to the first cool breeze of fall, donations started trickling in. People sent boxes of books, teacups, blankets. A retired carpenter volunteered to help convert the house's attic into a reading nook. A florist offered to bring fresh arrangements once a week. Even Rosie closed the diner early one Sunday and brought her famous lemon bars in a tin that read, "For your guests, sweetie," or just for you. Still, the work wasn't easy. Some nights, Jenna sat on the front steps of Arthur's house with her head in her hands, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of what she was trying to build. The doubts whispered in, "You're not trained for this. You're just a waitress with a wrench. You can't build a sanctuary." But then she'd see the lights from the garage still glowing softly across the yard. Or she'd walk past Arthur's old chair, where she once found that letter, and feel the warmth in her chest flicker back to life. She wasn't doing this alone. One evening, as she painted the front hallway with wide, steady strokes, a woman in her 60s rang the doorbell. Her cardigan was neatly buttoned, her shoes worn but clean. "I read about you in the paper," the woman said. "You knew Arthur Allen?" Jenna lowered her brush slowly. "Yes, I did." The woman's eyes shimmered. "He was my brother." Time froze. "I'm Elaine," the woman said, her voice faltering. "We lost touch years ago. I didn't even know he passed until a friend sent me the article." "I'm so sorry." Jenna invited her in, made tea, showed her the garage, the photograph, the note about the motorcycle. Elaine sat in his chair and wept quietly. "I always thought I'd have time to fix things with him," she whispered. But life kept getting in the way. And pride. So much pride. Jenna placed a hand gently over hers. "He forgave you," she said, and she meant it. He forgave everyone. That night, Elaine stayed for dinner. And the next week, she came back with 2 boxes of old family photographs. Together, they placed them along the hallway, turning the home into a living tribute. From then on, the listening house wasn't just a vision. It was alive. The first official guest was a man named Daryl. He was quiet, with deep-set eyes and hands that trembled when he reached for his cane. The nursing home called Jenna, saying he had no family left and no one to visit him. He didn't want medicine or therapy. He just wanted someone to talk to. Jenna picked him up herself. On the drive back to the house, Daryl stared out the window and said nothing. But once inside, as she handed him a cup of warm cider, he said softly, "This place smells like my mother's kitchen." That was all it took. He began talking. About his time as a train conductor. About the night his wife died holding his hand. About how silence had become his only companion in the past decade. Jenna sat with him every day that week. And on Thursday night, as they listened to Nat King Cole on the record player, Daryl smiled for the first time. "I didn't think anyone would remember me," he said. "But now I feel like I won't disappear." More guests came. A retired pianist who hadn't touched a keyboard in years. A former teacher who'd taught 3 generations, but now lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment no one visited. A woman who had once marched for civil rights and still wore her protest pins on her cardigan. Each one brought stories. Each one carried pain and beauty and the quiet hope that someone still cared. Jenna listened to every word. Sometimes she cried with them. Sometimes she just sat and held their hand. She hosted Sunday dinners around the long oak table, held poetry nights, started a weekly story circle, where guests could share memories in front of neighbors and friends. The rule was simple: no judgment, no interruptions, no clocks. Only listening. One crisp November afternoon, Jenna found herself alone in the attic, sorting through books for the new lending shelf. Outside, golden leaves fluttered down in the wind. She paused to sip her tea, and for a brief second, she thought she heard Arthur's voice. "You're doing good, kid." She closed her eyes. "I hope I am," she whispered back. Just then, footsteps echoed on the stairs. It was Paul, the college student with the cassette player. He stood in the doorway, holding a small folder. "Hey," he said. "I've been working on something. For school. A project. And well, it's kind of about this place." He handed her the folder. Inside were pages of interviews, photographs, and essays. At the top, The Listening House, a place where memory lives. Jenna scanned the pages. There were quotes from Daryl. A picture of Rosie with her lemon bars. A paragraph about Arthur, titled "The Man Who Sat at Booth 5." Tears filled her eyes. Paul scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. "I wanted to submit it for the State Social Impact Award. I wasn't going to tell you, but I think people need to know about this." She looked up, voice shaking. "Thank you. It's not finished yet," he said. "Still needs your story." Later that month, Jenna sat down at the same table where Arthur had once placed his folded letter. She began to write. Not for a newspaper, not for a crowd, but for him. "Dear Arthur, you once told me I'd be okay. That pain wasn't the end of the story. That people don't disappear if someone remembers them. I didn't believe you then, but now I do. Every time someone walks through the door with a story aching to be told, every time a forgotten voice is heard again, every time laughter echoes down the hallway of this old house you gave me, feel you here. Thank you for that last cup of coffee, for the chair you always sat in, for the quiet way you saved me. I'll keep listening. I promise. Love. Jenna." Winter arrived quietly in Ashford Lane. The Listening House stood warm and lit, a soft amber glow in the heart of the snowy street. The porch light never turned off. Even on the coldest nights, Jenna insisted it stay on for anyone who might feel lost, like she once did. Inside, the fireplace crackled, voices carried down the hall, and music drifted gently from an old radio Arthur once restored. The house had become what Jenna dreamed, not just a place, but a feeling. A safe landing. That December, the Listening House held its first Evening of Echoes, a gathering where people came to read letters they had never sent or say things they never got to say. Chairs circled the living room, cider steamed in mugs, and tissues were quietly passed from lap to lap. Jenna sat near the center, not to lead, but simply to be part of it. An elderly woman stood and read a letter to her late son. A teenage boy read aloud a voicemail he never deleted from his grandmother. Paul stood, trembling slightly, and read his final essay for school, the one Jenna had helped shape, polish, and believe in. When he was done, the room gave him a standing ovation, not for his words, but for what they carried. After everyone had spoken, Jenna rose slowly. She didn't bring paper. She didn't need it. "My name is Jenna," she said softly. "I used to work in a diner. I met a man there who always sat at the same booth. He never talked much until one day he did. And when he finally did, he handed me a story that changed my life." She paused. "I didn't save him. He saved me. And because of him, I learned that we don't need to be loud to matter. We just need to show up. We need to listen." The room was silent. And in that stillness, something sacred hung in the air. Not sorrow, not regret, but grace. That night, Jenna walked through the hallway alone, turning off the lights. She paused by Arthur's photo, gently brushing dust from the edge of the frame. She had added a second photo next to his snapshot of the garage in full bloom, people sitting on folding chairs, laughing. Arthur's legacy was now visible in every smile. In her room, she sat on the floor by the window, the one that faced booth 5 across the street. She often found herself gazing there when the night got quiet enough to stir old echoes. "I think you'd like what we built," she whispered. "But you'd probably say I always had it in me." She smiled. "I miss you, but I don't ache anymore. I carry you." Snowflakes began to fall, soft and slow. She reached for the leather-bound journal Rosie had gifted her, its pages now half filled with reflections, stories, and tiny names scribbled in the margins. Names of people who had passed through the house. People who mattered. People remembered. She wrote one more name and closed the book. Spring returned early that year. The Listening House added a small garden out back, with a wooden bench beneath a budding dogwood tree. Jenna called it Arthur's Corner. A plaque beneath the tree read, "In honor of those who stay long enough to listen, and those who go before we're ready to say goodbye." The bench became a sacred spot. Visitors often sat there with journals, with books, or simply with their silence. Some left notes beneath the bench, small folded papers held down with pebbles. Jenna never read them. She didn't have to. She knew what it meant to say something without needing an answer. In April, Paul's essay won the statewide Impact Award. He returned to Ashford Lane to give a speech at the community center. Reporters showed up. A film student from Chicago called Jenna, asking if she'd consider letting him make a short documentary about the listening house. "I just think the world needs to see what happens when someone like you listens," he said. Jenna agreed on one condition. "It's not about me," she said. "It's about them." The film premiered in a small theater downtown. Chairs were filled with townspeople, old guests, students, even Rose, who wore mascara for the first time in 15 years. When the final frame faded to black, the audience stood in quiet reverence. No applause. Just tears. Outside the theater, people waited to hug her, to tell her their stories, to say, "Thank you for not forgetting us." Jenna stood under the marquee, overwhelmed but steady. She didn't see herself as extraordinary. She saw herself as a girl who once wiped tables for strangers and poured late-night coffee for a man who sat in silence. And when that man finally spoke, he gave her everything she didn't know she needed. The last letter came in July. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed and typewritten. It read, "To the girl who sat across from me each night. I knew when I first met you that you were carrying something heavy. I saw it in your eyes, the way you looked at the floor instead of out the window. I didn't know your name then. I didn't know your story, but I saw your hurt, and I saw your hope, too. When I left you that letter, I wasn't sure I'd ever come back. My body was tired. My days were short, but I knew I had to leave something behind. Something real. Something that might outlive me. You gave me the gift of being remembered. I gave you the key to your own strength. Look what you've built. Look how far you've come. Don't stop now. There are still stories waiting to be heard. With all my heart. Arthur Allen." Jenna read it once. Then again. Then she pressed it gently against her chest and wept. Years passed. Seasons turned over like pages in a slow, cherished book. The listening house continued to grow, new rooms, new gardens, new hearts walking through the door. Jenna aged with it, not in a way that dimmed her light, but in a way that made it deeper, softer. On her 52nd birthday, Paul returned with his own children. They brought a bouquet and a cassette tape. "Play it," he said, smiling. It was Arthur's voice. Crackly, old, but unmistakable. "Tonight, I sat with a young woman who reminded me what it means to be alive. I don't know how much longer I'll be around, but if this tape survives me, I hope someone listens to it one day and remembers that we all matter, even in silence, especially in silence." Jenna closed her eyes. Outside, someone was laughing on the porch. Inside, the fire crackled, and the walls of the old house breathed like they always had. She stayed for a long time at that window, gazing toward the booth where it all began. And though she knew he would never walk through the door again, she also knew he never really left. He was in the quiet, in the stories, in every soul brave enough to speak and every heart brave enough to listen. The end.